Our amazing team informed me this week that today's show is our 200th edition of Undercurrents. I truly cannot believe it. We started this show back on July 25th, shortly after the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, just 2 days after Democrats replaced Joe Biden with Kamala Harris. It was an incredibly fraught time. I've mentioned this before, but we were literally building the studio. Shout out to our team, Oscar and Seb, who were working with their hands in this very room. I was outside on my computer watching the Trump rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, when a bullet hit the then candidate's ear and everything changed. We were here trying to launch the show on, I think it was a Saturday evening, as that happened. Again, this was an incredibly fraught time. We took the show to the Democratic National Convention. We took it to Butler, where Trump and Elon Musk returned to the site of the assassination attempt that changed everything back in October. We took the show to Kamala Harris's closing rally on the National Mall, to our election night marathon broadcast, to Inauguration Day, the joint address to Congress, and even the Wisconsin election this week. Our studio here is blocks from the White House. We are in Washington with our ear to the ground, but not like other channels and other news outlets. We really try with every single episode to challenge conventional wisdom, whether it's coming from the right or from the left. And I think our remarkable record of guests reflects that. We have had leading lawmakers from Rand Paul to Ro Khanna. We've had Matt Walsh and Matt Taibbi. We've had James Lindsay and Glenn Greenwald, Megyn Kelly, Cenk Uygur, Victor Davis Hanson, Marianne Williamson, Tim Miller, Jay Bhattacharya, now the head of the NIH. So many more people that their names would be hard to mention just in one introduction here. The morning after Elon Musk revealed that he wanted to implement quote-unquote Doge dividends, well, we had the man who was working with Musk on that idea come to the show the next morning to take us behind the scenes. We try to be just like our audience, curious. And I am proud to say that I don't think anyone else is doing a show quite like this, with the same relentless fixation on challenging our own priors in the middle of these wild news cycles. I know and love that not all of you agree with me and actively try to find guests who don't either. And that's what makes Undercurrents special. So thank you from the bottom of my heart to all of you and to our incredible staff at Undercurrents and Unheard. Shout out to James Billow, shout out to Rachel Page, Oscar Bickett, Billy Stevens, and so many others behind the scenes who get this show out every day, even during some of the most insane news cycles imaginable. We appreciate it. Onward and upward, we are ready. Subscribe at undercurrents.tv if you want to join our very special community. You get premium paywalled episodes, you get an email address to reach us directly, and you also get a weekly newsletter from me. I really do write it, and I really do appreciate everyone. Now let's get on to today's show. This is the perfect issue for us to tackle on our 200th edition of Undercurrents. Trump's re-election arguably hinged on one ad. It was that famous Kamala is for they, them spot that research subsequently found helped Trump defeat Kamala Harris. Then though, of course, Donald Trump won, and we, along with just about everyone else, declared the, quote, vibe shift had taken hold. Gavin Newsom even walked back his position when it came to trans athletes amidst this cultural change. But a headline caught my eyes this week. Writing on her Substack, Jennifer Say, who's been on this show before, published a piece entitled, "Despite President Trump's executive order signed on February 5th, there are still a whole lot of boys and men competing in women's sports." Jen accompanied that article with a long thread on X laying out her case that ideologues are still clinging to the idea that men and women should compete against one another, and athletes everywhere are still being affected, really everywhere. And I'd actually not even heard some of the stories that Jen shared, like that of San Jose State University assistant volleyball coach, or former assistant volleyball coach, Melissa Batsy Smoose, who was suspended for siding against the school on a trans athlete's participation. Quote, "She still doesn't have a job," Jen wrote. Add to that, her home was vandalized and shot at with a pellet gun back in February. In the aftermath of Trump's February 5th executive order on keeping men out of women's sports, a host of schools from K-12 to higher education are apparently ignoring federal directives. And if you dig into it, this trend of disobedience truly is more widespread than we're hearing about. The entire Philadelphia school district, for example, is ignoring the policy. So are Minnesota and California. As Jen points out, this is despite the vast majority of Americans believing women's sports should be for women. I'm curious about this case because it tests the durability of post vibe shift politics, which is arguably one of the most important questions that we cover here all of the time. If everyone seemed to believe in these things at the upper echelons of American business, politics, and culture for so long, as the DEI revolution happened, as 2020 happened, where are they now? Have people changed their minds? Have they decided just to, let other people live, or have they just been sort of playing their cards cleverly and waiting for another moment to raise this issue again and to sort of force the conversation back to where it was before Trump's re-election, before media outlets started covering this issue with a bit more fairness? I don't know. Jennifer Samite. She's the founder and CEO of XXXY Athletics and the author of that great Substack article we just referenced, also the author of the book Levi's Unbuttoned, which I highly recommend. Jen joins us now. Thank you for being here, Jen.
Thanks for having me, Emily.
Have you ever been the victim of a data breach? I sure have, and actually recently, so let me tell you, it is infuriating. These big corporations play fast and loose with our personal information, and when they mess up, they just move on like nothing happened, and of course, we can't. Meanwhile, no one is putting in any effort to actually protect our privacy from American companies that profit off of our data. Just how easy is it to find your personal information floating around online? You would be shocked. But here's the thing, we don't have to just accept it. We can take control, and that's exactly why I use Aura. Today's sponsor, Aura, does the heavy lifting to keep you safe online. I use it. I love it. They track down data brokers who are selling your personal information and submit opt-out requests on your behalf. If you give Aura a few weeks, and when you search your name, you will start seeing fewer results, which means less spam, fewer robocalls, and more privacy. Like I said, I tried it. I really like Aura, and I've tried other similar products. This one's my favorite. Aura also keeps an eye on the dark web for you, constantly monitoring to see if your personal information has been exposed. And that's really important. If it has been exposed, they send instant alerts right to your phone so you can act fast, which is critical. And parents, listen up. Aura's parental control features actually help you keep your family safe too. Their mobile app notifies you immediately of any critical threats to your identity. Oh, and did I mention they also have a built-in VPN with 100 plus virtual locations, so I know wherever I am, I can work and browse securely. Most importantly, Aura has your back in case the worst happens. If someone tries to use your stolen data to access your bank or credit accounts, you will know right away. And if things really go south, they offer up to $5 million in identity theft insurance. So here's the deal. Stop leaving yourself wide open to data breachers and brokers. Take control. Go to aura.com/undercurrents to start your 14-day free trial. That is enough time for Aura to find out if your personal data is already out there. And trust me, you'll want to know. So thank you, Aura, for sponsoring this video. I was under the impression that this problem had been solved, that men were competing in men's sports, women were competing in women's sports. I'm only partly joking, but it does feel culturally like everyone's sort of admitted, like, we know this is wrong, we know this is crazy, but that's not true, Jen. You had a great post explaining why. Tell us, what's still happening beneath the surface of the media chatter?
It's still happening everywhere. Nothing has changed, unfortunately. Trump signed an executive order on February 5th. I was fortunate to have been invited and be in the room. And I will tell you, as a person that is very aware of the sports governance landscape, I knew this was not the end, that it was a very important first step. And it puts it squarely at the center of the cultural conversation in a way that it really hadn't been before. But I knew it was sort of like the end of the beginning for several reasons. One, the executive order only impacts federally funded programs. That's K through 12 public schools and colleges and universities. It doesn't impact any sport or athlete that competes in the Olympic movement. If you compete for a private club, if you compete under the auspices of the US Olympic Committee, and you don't have to be an Olympic level athlete to do that. I mean, I was 6 competing under the auspices of the US Olympic Committee, and most people don't know twice as many athletes compete in that sort of lane as compete in high school and publicly funded. So that was going to be untouched regardless. And I want to come back to that because the fencing incident over the weekend is in that movement. But beyond that, I just sort of knew it in my bones as a 30+ year Californian that many states were not going to abide. And in fact, due to Trump derangement syndrome, many would publicly and loudly flout the executive order, and they will fight everything Trump does with every ounce of their being. And I think we're seeing that. There's just so many examples, which I tried to kind of line them all up in that post, in the last 2 months alone, of males competing and winning state championships in track and triple jump and on and on and on in states like Maine and California and Oregon and Washington and basically every blue state. They're just ignoring the executive order. The NCAA wrote a policy or released a policy the day after the executive order was signed. The NCAA policy should govern all of, college athletics. As I pointed out, along with Riley Gaines and many other athletes, this policy that they released was obviously done before the EO because it came out the next day, and it was a completely feckless, toothless, useless policy. I mean, the main reason is it set no clear boundary for who would compete in women's sports. And the proof required of being a woman was a birth certificate, which can be changed in 44 states.
Right. So that's a fantastic example. What are some of these other examples that stand out to you, whether K through 12 or at the NCAA level, at the collegiate level, just since February 5th, that are still happening basically left and right all over the country?
Well, just this weekend, actually, I'm going to point out a case that's in USA Fencing, which is under the U.S. Olympic Committee. Just this weekend at the University of Maryland, a fencer by the name of Stephanie, oh God, am I forgetting her last name? I'm a moron. A young 30-year-old fencer, so not even that young, not competing in college, University of Maryland, not an NCAA competition. She was presented with competing, fencing against a male. She bent a knee and she refused. And she was immediately issued a black card by USA Fencing, which means she was ousted and expelled from that competition. It remains to be seen whether she will be ousted from the federation and prevented from competing for the rest of the year. Like, will it be a suspension? We don't really know. And it was interesting. The conversation essentially got a bit heated between her and the ref. I'm using wrong fencing. It's probably not called a ref, officiant. I don't know anything about fencing.
We'll forgive that.
Her
Yeah.
opponent, yeah. And her asked me about gymnastics, and her opponent, and she said, I came here to compete in the women's category. I am not going to fence against a man. And the opponent said, what's wrong? Is everything okay? And she said, this isn't right. I'm not going to compete against a man. The officiant said, I think you'll get a black card. She said, I understand that. And then the opponent went on a tangent about how I'm allowed to do this. And he got quite flustered and angry. And technically he is correct. He is allowed to do it. The rules of USA Fencing allow it. She took a knee, took the black card, and was suspended or was ousted from the competition. So that's one very public example. But there's many examples. Like I said, there's a high school basketball player in San Francisco. He is named Henry Hanlon. He plays for a private school, the Waldorf School in San Francisco. Obviously, we know San Francisco is super woke. One might argue it's private. It doesn't get federal funding, but it operates, under the behest of the CIF, which does get federal funding. That's like the California board that governs high school sports. He was outscoring, the team was outscoring every opponent team by like twice as many points, and he was getting like 3/4 of the points for the team. How can these people be proud of themselves? Triple jump competitor, 8 feet he outjumped. He jumped 40 feet in the triple jump in a high school state competition. Next closest was 32 feet. If he'd competed in boys, I think he would have been like 12.
And again, this is all happening, you point this out in the piece, despite public opinion. I shouldn't even say shifting. I mean, there have been some shifts, but public opinion was never broadly supportive of this. And even so, I guess maybe, I mean, Jen, you mentioned as a 30 plus year Californian, maybe it's because some of these blue districts are so blue, whether it's blue counties, blue states. I think California and Minnesota both announced that they're fully ignoring the EO. The
Yeah,
Philadelphia school district fully ignoring the EO.
yeah.
So maybe it's because that there's this geographic isolation that we see this happening. Do you think there's truth to that?
I mean, I think a couple things. Approximately 80%, depending on the poll, this is a New York Times Ipsos poll, 79% of Americans agree that women's sports should be for women. That includes 67% of Democrats. I would argue the vast majority of those people are still silent because they are afraid of being called a bigot or a transphobe and getting dragged through the mud. And the fact is, they will be. A very loud and deranged minority will do anything to take you down if you come out in favor of girls and women. But we have to do it anyway because we're the majority. So I think even in places like California, I think most voters are in agreement. Um, but the leaders are cowardly. They're just cowards. And I do think, I try to climb inside their heads, and I wouldn't profess to be able to kind of know exactly what they're thinking. But I think some of them do believe they are the civil rights warriors of our day, and they are not going to kowtow to a bigoted minority. And I think the vast majority then follow suit with that, and they're just afraid, even though they're kind of scratching their heads and they think this isn't fair and common sense would dictate it doesn't make sense. I mean, Gavin Newsom, I'm sure you saw it and your listeners saw it. He did an interview with Charlie Kirk on his new podcast, and he admitted openly that it is terribly unfair for boys to compete in girls' sports. Everyone cheered, and we were relieved that he said that. But listen to how he ended that conversation, or that moment in the conversation. It was a yeah, and he went on to talk about, but these poor boys, they're boys, trans identified boys, they're so depressed and sad, and they'll kill themselves if they don't get to compete in girls. So that's where he left it. He's taking the side of I'll just say it, an unhinged minority, and he is forsaking women and girls in the process. And he's doing that so that he really, he feels like that is the compassionate thing to do. And I would argue it is not compassionate to women and girls at all. It isn't fair, and it is a total violation of the original intent of Title IX. But this is where we are. I think in general, the elected Democrats are throwing everything they have at this. They're lying, and they're saying, Trump's EO will lead to genital checks. Have you heard that?
Oh, I have. And what's your response to it, Jen?
It's a lie. It's not in any bill anywhere. It's a simple cheek swab. Anyone who knows anything about sports or has competed, you at a certain level, you go through all kinds of testing. You're drug tested. That's much more invasive. You have to pee in a cup in front of a person. You're weighed in if it's a, weight category oriented sport. Um, they're making stuff up. There are no genital checks. But they'll do anything. And I don't know. I don't care whether they believe it. I don't care whether they don't. They're wrong and we're right. And we're just going to keep pushing. And I think we just got to convince the 80% to stand up and say it, because once the 80% do that, the governing bodies will fall in line.
And I want to run the pessimistic scenario by you, which is that this becomes, and I've always been curious about this myself, is that, it felt like after the election and after the EO, even some media outlets they kind of flipped the switch, and they were like breathing their sigh of relief and were like, okay, so maybe we can talk about this like normal people again and we don't have to be so afraid. But at the same time, the ideologues that graduated from America's universities and genuinely believe that sex is interchangeable because they shouted it on the streets and in their pages for years, are still very committed to this. They believe it. They've believed it for years. They were taught it in school. It's just the reality that they see, and it's false, but it's what they believe. So when Democrats start trying to push back on Trump and Elon Musk, and they find issues to rally their base around, like Tim Walz, for example, does this then become powerful as a talking point? Yeah, tell us about this.
It does. I mean, let's just point out their ever shrinking base. I mean, I think approval ratings for the Democratic Party right now are like around 20%. I think the lowest they've ever been. I might be kind of rounding down slightly, but it's definitely in the 20s. I think I'm going to put in air quotes leaders of the Democratic Party because I think they're leaderless at the moment. But if you count people like Kamala and Tim Walz and AOC and Jasmine Crockett as the de facto leaders of the Democrat Party right now, they are convinced that the reason their approval is shrinking is they didn't go hard enough. I mean, Tim Walz just said it yesterday, I think. The reason we're losing voters is we haven't gone hard enough on DEI. We haven't gone hard enough on letting men play women's sports. Sorry, I can't even say it with a straight face. They believe that's why they're losing their base. They don't believe it is because people are tired of the nonsense and the lies. And so they'll just continue shrinking their base until they have a real moment of introspection.
And that hasn't happened yet, you don't think?
That has not happened yet. And there's
Interesting.
not been a leader who has urged common sense. I mean, I think Gavin's sort of pretending to with his little like I'm a moderate tour on the podcast, but he's just trying to position himself as a moderate so he could actually run in 2028. I mean, you have pockets of it. You know, you have who's the young man?
Seth Moulton in Massachusetts, his staff
Yeah, but
quit.
then he voted against the bill.
Right, right.
No, I was talking about Jonas. Is his name Jonas Wheeler? He's a state rep in New Hampshire, Democrat, young, 22, 23 years old, who has stood his ground on this issue. People like that will emerge as the stars, and the people who refuse to introspect in any way will go down with the ship, I think. But I think it's a long way away. They still don't understand that hating Trump is not a strategy that is going to win.
Yeah, that should have been clear circa like 2017, but here we are in 2025. Jen, you mentioned that you were at the White House for the signing of the EO, and I'm curious if you, what your sense is, whether this administration is devising ways to push back on the disobedience and different entities ignoring what's happening. What do you think is to come?
So, I mean, in his speech, he talked about holding states accountable by withdrawing federal funding. You know, public education systems around the country get billions of dollars in federal funding. There are already investigations into certain states for Title IX violations. And I think everybody saw the kerfuffle with the governor of Maine, you know, and she said, I'll see you in court. She's going to die on this hill of allowing boys to beat girls, which seems like a really dumb hill to die on. And he's going to wield the power of the office to withhold federal funding. It remains to be seen how that's going to play out. The University of Maine has already said they'll abide. They don't want to lose the funding, but that's not the entire federally funded system. So I do believe but it's like whack-a-mole right now. There's so many states that are not abiding. So I think they're probably looking to make an example of a couple and hope that the others will fall in line.
Well, as much of a bummer as this conversation has been, Jen, I suppose it's at least tragically good news for the bottom line of XXXY, where people can
Well,
find. Yeah, go.
here's a glimmer of hope, though.
Yeah,
I'll give you a glimmer of hope because I couldn't do what I do if I didn't think we would win.
yeah.
With every conflict that is very public on this issue, more people gather up their courage and come forward and speak out. And I think those conversations in your town, in your community, with the mom on your soccer team, you know, those are the important conversations that move the ball forward, honestly, more than someone like me. And I'm just trying to equip moms to have those hard conversations because that's a grassroots movement and that's how we change hearts and minds. And so for every public ridiculous example of this nonsense continuing, we recruit another mom and another dad. And so that's the good news.
I love that. Well, XXXY is great, super comfortable. So I hope it's doing well, Jen.
We're doing great. Thank you. Thanks for the time, Emily. It's always good to talk to you.
Oh, likewise. So happy to have you on. And thank you so much for being here. I just want to reiterate that on this 200th edition of Undercurrents, we are so grateful to our audience. Again, if you want to join the community, undercurrents.tv is the place to go. But I want to say to everyone right now, thank you. Thank you for being with us throughout this tumultuous year. And you know what? The action isn't going to slow down anytime soon. That's why we're here. And that's why we're interviewing people like Jen on the conversations that others maybe are ignoring, aren't covering fairly, aren't challenging their priors or conventional wisdom on. So make sure to stay tuned for more Undercurrents, because that's what we're doing every single day on this show. We appreciate it, and we will see you soon.